Dead Mage is a studio that has a history of creating games within the indie space. These developers started out with creating hack-and-slash games with some moderate success. Following this, their focus shifted to side-scrolling action. Shadowblade Reloaded was a ninja-focused action platformer with quality gameplay and some good style. While this was a good start for a new indie team, they would truly provide something both unique and captivating with their next title. Dead Mage wanted to combine a strong narrative with action RPG gameplay mixed in with roguelite elements. The goal was to create something that would capture the attention of the player through both its gameplay and story. Join me as we take a look back at Children of Morta. Dead Mage is a small indie studio. They had an ambitious goal for their next project. For Children of Morta, they wanted to combine story, art, and gameplay all into one seamless experience. At the outset of the project, this was supposed to be a small game with a 6-month development cycle. The developers quickly found out that there was so much more potential here, and as such, they looked to Kickstarter to fund their passion. As the project grew, so did the size of their team. Dead Mage grew from 5 developers to 18. They had a hard task of wanting to combine a complete story within a roguelike genre. Everything would be built around these two pillars of telling a compelling story and providing addictive roguelike gameplay. The story would focus on a family as they fought a great corruption in their land. Children of Morta would have a story that would work within the gameplay to create this one focused experience. When it came to the storytelling, the developers wanted to work well with the roguelike nature of the gameplay. Since players would be completing levels over and over again and finding new events within the dungeons, this allowed the story to take on this non-linear type of design that would provide both scripted story points and others that would feel more player discovered. This allowed the narrative to fit the mold better within the gameplay mechanics. The narrative designer had a goal of making the cutscenes as short as possible while providing the most information and achieving an emotional payoff. Children of Morta could not afford to take a long time to present long cutscenes, as that would disengage the player from the compelling gameplay. The team looked to Persian folklore for inspiration in their unique art style. Children of Morta would use pixel art as a means to present their world to the player. The goal was to provide a high amount of detail and color palettes for the game's backgrounds. Since the family was going to be the heart of the narrative, the developers used different family members to fill in roles for classic RPG archetypes like the magic user or the ranged bow fighter. The goal was to make each playable family member unique from a mechanical aspect. The hammer-wielding fighter would act very differently from a magic user. The family would be called the Bergsons, and their home would act as a hub for the game. The player would see each Bergson while not on a mission, and additional story beats would pop up throughout the game while observing the home. The house would be the player's means to upgrade and better the playable characters. Story beats and random events would also occur in dungeons as well. A fellow Bergson might be in need of assistance, and the player would work with a friendly AI to complete a room together. The narrative lead wanted to flesh out each character and make them stand out. Each of the different family members would have their own personal interests to make them more dynamic. For example, one child would be interested in music while another would be into meditation. When it came to blending roguelike gameplay with the storytelling, the developers needed to find a way to present the bulk of the narrative to the player in a way that would not be missed. Considering that with roguelike gameplay, there is a chance that a player would not need to repeat the same area over and over again and complete it quicker. The developers did not want the player to then miss important story beats because they were not replaying a certain area. As such, the important main story moments would be reserved to be presented at the home, and the player would be forced to return back to home after their death or completion of a level. This ensured that no matter the player's skill level, the narrative would be intact.
When you think of family, what comes to mind first? A story of hope, of love, of despair,
From the gameplay side of things, the levels in Children of Morta would be made up of a number of different rooms connected to each other by doorways. The game would provide a wealth of different rooms to the player, from a space that would contain a hard fight or one where an NPC was requesting help. The rooms would be procedurally generated, providing a fresh experience each time the players entered a level. To ensure that the levels would reflect the current state of the story, the developers created a custom tool in their Unity engine to modify the events in the levels to do this. For example, this was used early on in the game to present a room where the player would rescue a wolf. This would then create a set of rooms in later runs that would cause the player to encounter rooms with medicine to help the wolf. The goal with this was to create a quality set of randomness and freshness to the player from both a story and gameplay perspective. The playable characters would be slowly introduced to the player throughout the narrative. This would allow the player to experiment and try out another family member and see how differently they played. A unique gameplay mechanic would also factor into this. There would be a fatigue system that would put a debuff on a character that was used more often. The goal was to incentivize the player into exploring each of the different characters. Furthering this was how each Bergson would have family traits that could be unlocked that would provide enhancements to every playable character. During the development, the studio opted to essentially break their game up into chapters, and this would be reflected in both the narrative and the levels. To provide a greater sense of progression, areas were broken up into a few different stages, and this was done to better convey the player's progression throughout the game. From a technical side of things, the studio opted to use Unity for their game engine, and found ways to use this engine to effectively develop their game. The developers wanted to ensure that the load times were short since the players would be replaying the levels over and over again. At first, their load times were going to be about 4 to 5 minutes, but after implementing their custom asset management tool, those load times became 10 to 15 seconds. This ensured that the player could get right back into the action and on a new run. Kickstarter was used to help fund the project, and members with the founder status acted as a test group for the project. Throughout the course of development, Dead Mage would make weekly builds and have their testers provide feedback. Halfway through the development, Dead Mage partnered with 11-Bit Studios, who has worked on several other successful indie projects. This relationship allowed the team to retain their creative freedom while receiving constructive criticism. 11-Bit Studios assisted greatly in distributing the game on all major platforms at the time. Children of Morta had their fair share of struggles during development. One large one was that there was no clear line between pre-production and production. This resulted in assets and elements from the game being developed but then not being used for the betterment of the final game. The team was very focused on other aspects of the project, which caused the story to deviate from the initial vision and then required revisions and tweaking to ensure the story was in line with what the developers initially wanted to achieve. This caused the development to be very chaotic at times. The team felt that co-op would be perfect for their game, but had to limit the co-op to local play as the online implementation proved to be more difficult. As such, this was a feature that Dead Mage aimed to provide following the release of their game. There were some other features that ended up not making it into the game and were dropped during development. There would be plenty of story bits that would happen at the Bergsons' home, and at one point during development, some of these sequences would be interactive, but this never got implemented. There was a prototype gardening and cooking system within the game that would provide the player with different buffs. These aspects were dropped because it drastically slowed down the pacing. The bulk of the gameplay mechanics did not lend themselves well to having the player spending long periods of time at the Bergsons' home. The home was used to convey some quick story moments, upgrade the characters, and then get right back into the dungeon crawling. While the development could have gone smoother in certain areas, these developers found ways to create gems from the chaos. Children of Morta was a visually captivating title that wanted to try and blend many different elements together into something unique. The gameplay would be a mix of RPGs and roguelite elements with hack and slash gameplay, and all of this would be surrounded and infused with a strong narrative hook about a family trying to defeat corruption. The developers wanted to have the Bergsons be the centerpiece for the story. They wanted to create a bond between the family members to make these characters feel and act genuine, while creating a bond with the player and the characters on screen. The Bergsons' home would be used as a main hub for the players to upgrade the characters, while at the same time this would allow the player to observe each of the family members completing their everyday routines. The levels would feature a rich amount of procedural generation to keep the game fresh and encourage constant exploration. After 5 years, Dead Mage was ready to release their passion project. In September 2019, Children of Morta was released to the world. Children of Morta is an excellent indie that succeeds at incorporating a few different genres. The gameplay is a nice mixture of hack and slash action that you would find in an action RPG. This is then combined with many elements that would be found in a roguelite. This creates a compelling gameplay loop where the action is satisfying. You are finding unique and fun items on your different runs, and then there is this constant sense of progression with how the leveling works. From a gameplay perspective, Children of Morta takes some of the best elements from these two genres to blend them together to create something new and specific to this title. All this is infused with a well-written and executed story. Story beats are provided at set points in the campaign, along with many being encountered through exploration. Children of Morta is a top-tier indie game.
She knew where it was coming from. Her ancestors had spoken of such corruption flooding down the mountain. But Grandma Margaret wanted to know what it was, and what needed to be done to destroy it.
Children of Morta excels at its gameplay loop and progression, along with the character class options for the player. There are 6 different classes to choose from, and they are represented by the different family members. There is a warrior, archer, assassin, monk, pyromancer, brawler, and a healer. The warrior and brawler are your heavy hitters. The archer and pyromancer provide you with ranged options, while the assassin and monk are the fast damage dealers, and the healer is a mix of a close and range fighter. Each of the classes have their own weapons and skills that make them feel like 6 individual characters. Some do have some similarities. For example, the warrior and brawler have more health and are heavy hitting, but the brawler is so focused on all-out attacking with his hammer, while the warrior has a sword and shield and can attack while using the shield to minimize some hits. The archer can move while firing her arrows, while the pyromancer casts fireballs for her main attack, but she is a stationary fighter, whose attacks will ramp up the longer she keeps firing them. Each of the different classes operate in their own unique way. Each of them feature a distinct playstyle that is not like the others. The game has a stamina bar that is used differently by each of the characters. For the warrior, this relates to the strength of their shield and how much damage you can block. Whereas for the archer, this relates to how long she can move and shoot. For the pyromancer, the bar operates more like a normal mana bar in an action RPG, and her magic attacks will deplete this bar. The monk's use of the bar is a bit different in that each time he attacks, it will build up the bar, which will give him more armor and then will be depleted as you take hits. Depending on how far you have the bar built up, you will lose less health with each of the hits. Then the use of the bar very much helps to make each character operate differently than the others. This is not a game where there are slight differences between the classes. Each one has their own methodology that makes them fun to try out. I found the assassin to be one of the more interesting ones. As you attack enemies or even breakable objects, you will increase your fury meter. As this grows, you will attack quicker and be able to deal more damage. The assassin does not have much health or defense, so the trick is to find a way to maintain that high level of fury to defeat enemies really fast. This also makes you look at combat situations differently. If you have a mid-level boss coming your way, you might want to tackle it differently depending on the character you have. The warrior could go right in, using their shield to block some attacks, whereas the assassin might need to first build up their fury bar and focus on some of the smaller enemies before contending with the larger one. Children of Morta slowly introduces the player with more character options throughout the campaign. This means that you are not overloaded with the options at the start and can gradually try out the different characters. Along with this, the progression and the use of the fatigue system works to push the player into trying out a new character at any time. When it comes to the actual minute-to-minute action, it is delightful. The mixture of quality sound and blood effects with good impact to your hits heightens the quality hack-and-slash action. The levels are filled with different enemies along with traps to avoid. The game's different regions have their own specific enemy types along with different traps. While the regions visually change by featuring new obstacles, it also allows these places to have their own identity. There's a nice mix between melee fighters, ranged foes, and mini-bosses, along with some unique enemies like the corruption that will spawn spawn into an area that you have previously cleared and try to catch you off guard. New regions feature enemies that can come from the ground to cause some damage. The traps are pretty easy early on with some spiked floors, but a few levels in, the game will combine the spiked floors with towers that will suck you in, making it harder to avoid. Within the second region, there are traps hidden in the sand that can deal a quick amount of damage to you. Overall, there is a good amount of enemy variety from their appearance along with how they attack you on a mechanical level. Furthering the variety is how each of the dungeons will have random rooms that offer up different challenges. For example, one room might act like a mini horde mode, or you will need to protect an ally, or some are more story oriented, and some play like a short game of Pong. I honestly wish that there were more rooms that provided a minigame feel like the Pong-like rooms. There are a few puzzle-based rooms as well where you need to step on the right plate to gain a reward. The best of these rooms are the story-focused ones, especially when it involves starting a mini-story arc. I generally enjoyed the boss fights presented in Children of Morta. They provide a good bookend to each of the levels. They do have their own ins and outs and special attacks that you need to watch out for, but even on hard mode, these fights can just be muscled through without much strategy. They are largely enjoyable fights with some good rewards. I just wish that they were a bit more involved and different in how you tackled them. In fairness, the final boss does provide the most impressive in the game, and it's a nice mixture of similar elements from before with some new ones. I just wish that this thought process was used on each of the bosses to make them stand out more. One of the best parts that complements the action in RPGs or roguelites are how the progression systems are executed. More specifically in rogue-type games, you can have a situation where you lose everything if you die on a run, and then you go back and you can only take back the player's skills that you have gained from it, but nothing that is upgradable within the game itself. I personally prefer rogue games that allow you to do both, earn something while on your run, and then the option to upgrade your character consistently throughout the course of the game. Children of Morta provides both of these things. This way that you have progression in the long term and in the short term. When it comes to the long term, there is a lot of enjoyable upgrades to grind for. As you defeat enemies, your character will earn experience points and gain levels. Each level up will provide you with a skill point. Each of the characters have their own skill tree, and you can opt to choose how you want to spend those points. It is important to note that there really isn't a lot of options in build diversity with the character classes, as the game is more focused on providing 6 distinct classes rather than classes that are highly customized. That being said, you can choose where you want specific points to go into at first. Now, as you use your skill points, you will increase a blue bar. As you hit different levels, you will unlock family traits. This is how the progression incentivizes you to play as different characters. Each of the characters have 4 different unlockable family traits that will provide every character with a bonus. For example, some will increase your maximum health, provide other stat bonuses, or unlock the ability to have one of the other characters to show up randomly and help support you in a fight. So while I may have favored to play the game as 1 or 2 characters, the game pushed me in the direction to try out every class and gain those useful family traits. Now, the level ups are not the only means for the long-term progression. While on a run, you will pick up gold, and you can take this back with you to your house. The house acts as a hub, and you can access which levels you want to go to, level up your characters, and spend your gold. Now, all of the upgrades that are obtained from using the gold are provided to each one of your characters. You can use the gold to improve how often gemstones are dropped, experience bonuses, improving your damage or health along with other stats. The long-term progression in this game is really addictive, and the use of the gold means that you will never walk away from a run with nothing. Now, the short-term progression keeps each of the runs very interesting. You will select one of a few maps and begin a run. A run will consist of a few floors, and it will be bookended by a boss fight. While the type of location may look the same each time you play it, the rooms and enemies are randomized with procedural generation. As you defeat enemies and explore, you will find gemstones. These gemstones can be used to open up chests that will provide you with different enhancements along with more gold. You can also opt to use the gemstones in the dungeon shops. Now, either through unlocking chests, completing puzzle rooms, or through exploration, you will gain short-term bonuses to your characters that are useful on that run. You can equip different items that will enhance your stats, provide you with an allied AI, give you another attack, or even greatly increase your damage depending on how many gemstones you have found and not used. Runes can be used or bought with gemstones gemstones as a means to enhance your attacks. For example, the archer can fire piercing arrows or fire 3 arrows at once. Then there are active items that give you additional moves that you can use that are on a cooldown. These are additional attacks like grenades, spawning allies, or even distracting enemies. Lastly, there are the short-lived enhancements that you will find with obelisks that will enhance a stat for a short period of time. All of these short-term rewards are lost when you die, but they also greatly help to keep the dungeon crawling fresh. The randomness of what you will find and equip on each run means that a new piece of equipment can greatly provide you with a new strategy that you can change up on the fly. The long-term rewards provide you with an enjoyable grind where you're always making progress towards something, whether it is a new level up, family trait, or buying something with your gold. The short-term rewards gives you interesting options that help to make each run unique.
Kevin returned from his saga with barely a scratch, yet he found no appreciation from his family, especially his father. Despite having Linda on his side, his father was still mad at him for endangering himself and worrying them all, including his pregnant mother. His favorite line, asking how he could be so inconsiderate. He wondered whether Uncle Ben would understand his bravery and initiative better. With his heroic act unrecognized, the young boy waited, frustrated, expecting more punishment. What Kevin had not expected was his parents' reaction. Heartened by his courage, his father was going to teach him the ways of battle.
The story is one of the best and surprising aspects about the game. Usually when you go into a game that has roguelite elements, I do not expect a compelling story. I want a gameplay flow and loop that hooks me and makes me want to never stop coming back to it. Children of Morta applies the same addiction that it does with the gameplay with the execution of the story as well. This is a good example of a situation where the story is good and it's elevated by the strong storytelling. There is a nice mix of scripted story beats, additional story parts found through exploration or observed at the Bergsons' home, and the near-perfect narration combined with the expressive pixel art is what helps to bring this narrative to life. Much of the story is relying on the delivery of the narrator, as he needs to convey all of the emotions throughout the adventure, from humorous parts to very emotional and epic moments. I have nothing but praise for how the story is told. The expressive animations help to bring more humanity to these characters. You will easily find yourself getting invested in the story with a nice mixture of a good script with great narration. The relationships between the different Bergsons is what helps to keep you hooked. The narrative does a good job of conveying some small but effective arcs for each of the different family members. For example, early on, one of the young children wants to join the fight, but his mother and father disapprove of this and want to keep him safe. After a few instances of returning back to the Bergsons' home to witness new story beats in this arc, we see that Kevin went out on his own without his parents' approval, and we get to see some of that tension between him and his parents, along with a satisfying resolution of Kevin officially joining the fight. This small arc effectively develops Kevin along with exploring more of his relationship with his parents. The game does have its moments of high emotion, sadness, and epic conflict, but I honestly found the through line of the game's wholesomeness to be really charming. We see this family struggle together and work together for the betterment of each other and their land. There's sometimes conflict between the different family members, but there is this satisfying resolution about their commitment to each other and backing each other up, along with some very sweet moments thrown in between a husband and wife. The wholesome moments were some of my favorite parts in the story. It is important to note that the narrative is delivered in such a way that keeps you continually invested. There is a big chance that when you return to the home area to upgrade, there will be a new cutscene or optional cutscenes to witness. This means that even in death, you might even be treated to a new story bit. Along with this, the dungeons have instances of you helping other travelers and can help to paint the dire nature of that area. Sometimes this relates to mini story arcs like saving a young wolf from the corruption, and this starts a quest where you find medicine to help him. There are other instances where you need to work with your family members to find treasure or destroy a piece of corruption. I like these moments as it gave more screen time to working with your family. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised with the story, and it's well written and executed.
As if night had become day, the cub showed no signs of its past struggles, with Lucy and he now simply dancing the day away. If the little wolf cub was to stay, it would need a room and bed of its own. All too happy to build it, Ben only required some wood and nails from nearby.
After you complete the main campaign, you can opt to keep grinding away on your current upgrades or take your stuff into New Game Plus mode. After the game's release, the developers provided a brand new mode separate from the campaign. This new mode is very much like a traditional rogue game. There isn't really a focus on story, but rather playing around with the gameplay mechanics and progression. The player can select from any characters right away, and each of them start with all their moves unlocked. The goal is to survive a set amount of different floors, and if you die, all of your progress is wiped. There are some starting bonuses that you can work to grind for as well. I do like how the monsters are not restricted to their areas like in the campaign, but rather all mixed together in this mode. Overall, this is an enjoyable mode that provides you with more content. When it comes to flaws, I only have a few minor ones, and some of them I brought up earlier in the video. My main flaw, or rather something that I want to comment on, is the use of the fatigue system. Essentially, your character that you use a lot will get a debuff that will slowly go away as you play as other characters, or use a hard to find item to clear all of your fatigue. I am sort of in the middle on the use of this. I honestly find it annoying that the game is essentially forcing me to play as other characters, when I may want to focus on a particular one. I think the use of the family trait system does a better job on promoting the use of other characters. Other than this, I absolutely love this game. The gameplay is satisfying and addictive, the story keeps you emotionally invested, and from a presentational standpoint, it's absolutely stellar. Before we move to the conclusion, here are a few tracks from the excellent soundtrack. Children of Morta is easily one of the best indies I have ever played. As someone who plays a lot of indie games, I have 4 buckets that I tend to place them in. At the bottom, there are the cheap and poorly made indies. Above that are indies with a good concept, but they do not do anything interesting with it, so they become stale after an hour. Then you have the generally well-made indies, and above that are the exceptional ones. This one is in my highest tier for indies. Children of Morta succeeds at providing a gameplay loop that hooks you in and makes you want to keep going. The story works in tandem with the gameplay to create this compelling experience. The icing on top is the presentation with inviting visuals and music. Children of Morta deserves more attention than it has ever received, and I think part of this is how the medium is treated in the games industry. Many of the big publications and content creators spend most of their time covering the big AAA games and only about a handful of indies per year. The media does seem to universally select the same indies to prop up, and as such, many get left behind even if they are absolutely excellent. This is part of the reason why I wanted to give this game the retrospective treatment, and with a lot of development information being available online, I felt compelled to do so. If you look at Dead Mage's prior works, you would have expected them to deliver a good game, but not a great one. Children of Morta impresses in almost every area, and I cannot wait to see what these developers tackle next. I highly recommend it, and thank you very much for watching.